So once again, welcome everybody to this installment on Third Act Lawyer's somewhat irregular webinar series. Tonight, we'll start with a short presentation about Third Act's newest working group called Third Act Actions Lab, after which we'll hear about the Model Climate Laws Initiative. My name's Pat Almanroad, and I'm co-facilitator of Third Act Lawyers, a working group of the national organization Third Act. I know most of you joining us tonight are Third Act members, but just in case there are a few out there who aren't, Third Act is a volunteer organization of folks over 60 and older actually, fighting to preserve our fragile climate and our increasingly endangered democracy. As I like to say, the easy stuff. You can find out more about Third Act at thirdact.org or send us an email to lawyers@thirdact.org. As we go tonight, you're welcome to put questions and comments in the chat as we go along, and we'll take some time for Q&A at the end of each segment. So now it's my pleasure to introduce David Hughes. David's a professor of anthropology at Rutgers who writes about topics including environmental anthropology, climate change, and colonialism. He holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of California at Berkeley. And I lost my place. And he writes on aspects of energy democracy, ranging from public ownership of wind and sunlight to civil disobedience against fossil fuels. And I think that's largely what we're going to hear about tonight. His books include Energy Without Conscience and Who Owns the Wind? And he's also served as president of the Rutgers Faculty Union. You can find him at davidmcdermotthughes.wordpress.com. I'll put that in the chat. And he's here today, as I've said, as co-facilitator and one of the moving forces behind Third Act's newest working group, the Third Act Actions Lab. So David, take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Pat. That was a very generous introduction. I wasn't expecting that. Also, I am a kind of a wannabe attorney, having worked as a chief negotiator for my union, and I am sort of joined at the hip with one or two attorneys as a result of that. So this is a horizontal launch of our working group. We decided not to go for the big fanfare of a kind of national launch, but instead to reach out to every working group and every affinity group one-on-one. And the lawyers group is the first one, in fact. So you are the first instance of the horizontal launch of the Actions Lab. And I think that's very fitting because, as you'll see, I'm hoping that we will have a special relationship with you folks because the work that we do is quite complementary. Like you, we are a non-geographical national group. We are focused on a method or methods of action, not so much on a profession and certainly not on a state. So let me tell you a little about the history of the Actions Lab, then the first action, then how some of you might get involved. So a lot of us participated in the Summer of Heat in 2024. As Pat knows, those were the actions in New York which shut down Citibank for a portion of every business day during the summer. There were 7,000 arrests. Some of those were multiple people multiple times. And we actually got a small concession from Citibank, which is that they will no longer fund fossil fuel projects in the Amazon basin. So that got a lot of people very excited about nonviolent direct action, about civil disobedience, and about the green roles of jail support and organizing that go around those, the lawful roles that go around civil disobedience. And so people formed the Nonviolent Actions Network, which then matured in the course of Trump's election and the first part of 2025 to become the Actions Lab. And so our role, as it has been designated in the Third Act ecosystem, is to be a kind of innovations hub for new theories, new strategies, new theories of change, new tactics, in order to shut down fossil fuels and defend democratic rights. So our first action was on September 19th. We staged what we called a petrostate tour. which involved appearing and demonstrating outside the American Petroleum Institute, the American Gas Association, and a couple similar lobby shops, making the point that the fossil fuel lobbies have in fact captured our democracy and that we have now a petrostate, which is a kind of amalgam of corporations, regulators, and electeds who promote fossil fuels, who always promote fossil fuels. They may promote renewables, but they're certainly always promoting fossil fuels. And we did this tour in alliance with a bunch of organizations from the Gulf South. So we probably, as I'm about to explain, we're going to turn our attention to the Gulf Coast and Texas very soon. Um, the ways to get involved. Our next affinity group meeting is going to be on December 16th at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. We will be inviting Wen Stevenson to talk about his new book, Hope in the Dark. He's a journalist and organizer with a lot of experience in nonviolent direct action, and he's going to explain some strategies of it and explain, justify why it's necessary. So you could come to that event. I'm going to put, in fact, right now, our website here, where you can sign up and get the link to the seminar. And my own email address is here if you want to reach out directly. Um, Another activity we're doing is we've just joined up with Eric Arnhem and organizations he works with. Eric is the lawyer basically who works for the climate movement in New York in every aspect of civil disobedience. And there's quite an exciting project he has going where you may have heard of the enormous arrests in Britain of people who are part of the Stop, excuse me, what is it? What is the name of it? Just Stop Oil campaign, and also campaigns defending freedom of speech and assembly regarding Palestine, because the government of the United Kingdom outlawed a group called Palestine Action and also outlawed the mention of their name. This is quite a shocking thing for attorneys to contemplate. So the activists in London need jail support overnight, and we're in an extremely good position to provide it because of our time zone. And this is sort of back office things of keeping track of individuals, figuring out what jails they're in, emailing, then phoning the people who are providing food to them and and the attorneys in London who are trying to get them out quickly. There's another team in Australia covering another set of hours. So basically, we can go global in the Anglosphere here if we have a strong footprint in the US. So this is something that the Actions Lab is going to be working very hard on. Another thing we've got going is we're going to return to Sarah Week in Houston. Sarah Week is probably the most influential oil and gas corporate conference put on by Cambridge Energy Research Associates in Houston. It'll be March 23rd to 27th, and we plan on joining Gulf South groups in some civil disobedience and some lawful disruption as well. Rounding it out here, the final thing and this is where I think I'm hoping we can really look for support from Third Act attorneys. We are trying to develop a theory of change that involves property-based resistance by landholders to the construction and surveying for fossil fuel infrastructure. Essentially resisting eminent domain, resisting easements. There is a particular project in Texas which we're doing research on and trying to organize for. There may be another one in New Mexico, possibly something in Tennessee. So this is a new strategy of basically playing the card of property holding and property rights, where the climate movement, this fraction of the climate movement, would assert property rights on behalf of and with landholders who simply don't want a pipeline or an easement across their land. And we really need legal advice on questions of trespass, questions of eminent domain in the various states, but also just conceptually as well. So you wouldn't have to be from Texas to provide us with useful insight regarding eminent domain law. And then finally, you probably have ideas that we haven't thought of. We are right now trying to figure out how to stop fossil fuels under a quasi-dictatorship and get away with it. And that's where we really need legal advice about risks and also legal advice about opportunities. Um, so I will leave it there. As I said, I don't take any questions because I do have 2 minutes left. I've got the website of Actions Lab where you can sign up there, and I've got my personal email address where you can email me questions about any of this. That's it. Questions
Thank
if
you,
there are
David.
any.
If you have questions, please raise your hand. Your electronic hand would be great because that pops you up to the front of the line. And meanwhile, while we're waiting for other staff questions, David, it occurred to me, well, first of all, I applaud you for what Actions Lab is doing. You know, we always make the joke that it's third actors, it's not third lookers or third passersby or anything like that. So you guys are really taking that challenge and running with it. I've noticed as an observer of Third Act Actions Lab, I've noticed that you do have a pretty strong, it seems to me, theoretical basis. That this is not just a bunch of people running out into the street. You've really thought some of this through. Can you maybe say a little bit about the theoretical basis that, or bases that you're going off of?
Yes, well, I don't think there's consensus. A lot of us are thinking
Hmm.
um, outside the box, not necessarily in the same way. But there, the basis of the property-based resistance strategy is to say that, imagine that we get no legislation at the federal level that shuts down fossil fuels anytime soon. All right. Then um, a strategy of electing legislators and so on is not going to be effective. What's going to be effective is shutting down fossil fuels directly. So we have to figure out how to do that, how to actually disrupt the flow of fossil fuels again and get away with it. Jury nullification is possibly part of that.
Yeah.
I wrote an article on Boston Review, in fact, called A Climate Strategy of Last Resort, discussing the possibilities for jury nullification um, in the defense of property against pipelines. So, this is risky stuff, but we're living in dangerous times and we need some desperate measures, I think. But I don't quite know how risky it is. This is where I'd like to lean on one or two of you as we kind of flesh out these strategies. And again, we're a lab, so we want to experiment. And some of our experiments will succeed and some of them will fail.
Well, we wish you all the best, and hopefully some folks will join in and provide some of that support for you. John, I see your hand. You're muted.
Well, that's my best side, the muted. Yeah, I'm curious about the involvement of faith communities because when I look back at really significant challenges to authority, you had the abolition movement that finally came over the top with the involvement of faith communities, the same thing with civil rights. And, arguably we could do another SCLC again, where you've got a moral and ethical
Hmm.
basis for action that correlates with the legal resistance. And then that becomes a basis for asking for legislation for natural law implementation rights and that sort of stuff. So how does Action Lab address that opportunity, if you will?
Good question. So there's some debate about whether fossil fuels are like um, civil rights or whether they are like slavery. Um, Slavery being an energy system, civil rights being a set of practices and forms of equality. Um, I would like to build a mass movement of civil disobedience against fossil fuels in the way the SCLC did. Um, I think we would need all of Third Act to be involved in that. And Third Act Central took a decision after Trump's election not to even talk about civil disobedience, not to talk about anything unlawful because the leadership is afraid of state repression. Um, so I think we're a little bit exceptional because we have a mandate to innovate, but I don't feel that we even joining with you, I don't think we're gonna persuade Third Act Central to build a mass movement of unlawful action against fossil fuels soon. We could try, and something may change. Um, But I think we try to work with groups outside Third Act and with other affinity groups. And maybe the conditions will change. If we can hook up with the democracy movement
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
build a movement against fossil fascism or something, yeah, that's where I think the avenue of innovation is. But we basically need more to think about a strategy that big. We need more people. We need some of you to think about a strategy that big.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I think
David,
that
thanks very much. We need to move on to our next
Mhm.
presenters. But folks, David has his contact in the chat and the contact for the Actions Lab. So please give it some thought. You may want to sign up and help them out. And David, we wish you all the best and thanks again.
All right. Thanks so much for your time, everybody.
Okay. So now it's my pleasure to welcome John Binder, Karla Perri, and Jim Geocaris, who will tell us about the Model Climate Laws Initiative, the MCLI for short. John Binder is the executive director of the MCLI and a non-resident senior fellow at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia Law School. Prior to assuming that post, John was Deputy Commissioner for Climate Change, Air Resources, and Energy at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, overseeing the Division of Air Resources and Office of Climate Change, and managing the DEC's implementation of the state's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA. John led the development of New York's Cap and Invest program and the state's participation in RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. He was responsible for the development and execution of a wide range of policies, regulations, and other efforts to reduce air pollutant emissions and address the changing climate. Prior to being appointed Deputy Commissioner, John was an attorney in the DEC's Office of General Counsel for 15 years, serving as DEC's lead counsel regarding climate issues, providing drafting and legal support for the promulgation of regulations, permitting decisions for major energy projects, and other clean air and energy actions. John received his BS from Cornell University and his JD from Tulane. So welcome, John. Karla Perri is an attorney and senior executive with experience in federal and state environmental, energy, and sustainability issues. I'm trying to run through this as quick as I can here. As a member of the Spectrum Group LLC, a government affairs firm located in Alexandria, Virginia, she primarily provides strategic advice and support to corporate clients who market their products and services to the federal government. For the past several years, she's focused on policy, legislative, and regulatory issues in the defense energy sector. Karla served as an Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of Defense in the Office of Environmental Security. Previous federal service also includes working at EPA's Office of Global Change on issues related to the Montreal Protocol, the phase-out of chlorinated solvents, and numerous other regulatory issues. In addition to federal service, Ms. Perri practiced environmental litigation, was a senior lobbyist, and worked on Capitol Hill as staff on the Joint Economic Committee and at the Congressional Research Service. Karla is also an assistant adjunct professor at UMGC and teaches graduate classes in cybersecurity governance, management, and policy. For the MCLI, she coordinates policy outreach. She's a graduate of George Washington Law and also holds an MA in political science from Colorado State. Welcome, Karla.
Okay, bye.
Please mute yourself. Thanks. Third actor Jim Geocaris has over 45 years experience in environmental law, most recently as a partner in Louis Brisbois' Orange County, California office. Jim retired from that firm last year, and since 2022, he has helped MCLI with outreach in California. Jim began his career in the late 70s as a fellow at the Center for Law and the Public Interest in Los Angeles, followed by service in the Office of General Counsel for the Secretary of Defense and in the Department of Energy. Jim then worked at a major Chicago law firm, helping to expand the firm's new environmental law practice. He's represented clients ranging from local manufacturers to Fortune 500 companies in environmental law matters. It's handled environmental and energy issues for large infrastructure projects, including expansion plans and projects at LAX and O'Hare airports, nuclear power plants, a major metropolitan wastewater system, highway projects, and regional groundwater extraction and treatment systems. Jim's a graduate of Stanford Law and has served on the school's Board of Visitors. He also holds a master's in political science from Stanford. And that's it. Whoosh. Welcome, Jim. Welcome, John. Welcome, Karla. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Pat. Really appreciate it. It's really nice to be here. And thanks for those really nice introductions. So I'm John Binder. Like Pat said, I'm the executive director of the Model Climate Laws Initiative. And we want to spend some time, and you already heard about us, the speakers today, so I won't spend time on this slide. We want to spend some time talking about our initiative, describing some ways that it might be of use to all of you as third actors and as lawyers, and talking a little bit about ways that maybe we can work together and ways you might be able to get involved with our efforts. So I'll talk a little bit about the legal and political context that we all find ourselves in. Pat and David alluded to that, of course. We'll talk about how the initiative can help with some of the challenges that we're facing right now. Karla will go through a little bit of a walkthrough and explain to you how you can use our website and the resources that we have. Jim will give a local case study with examples from a municipality in California. And then, like I said, we'll talk about ways you might be able to get involved. And then if we have time at the end, we'll have some discussion and questions. So it's interesting that we went from David to us, right? Because there's a lot of different sort of theories of change that we all can think about in this difficult climate that we're all in. But I think one of the things that I want to leave you all with is that as difficult and as challenging and as unfortunate as what we are seeing from the federal government is right now, state governments and local governments do have the ability to do a lot of good. And they do have a critical role in addressing climate change. They have the ability to do a lot through their own laws, and many already have. And obviously, because of what we're seeing from the federal government, which is very difficult to see on a day-to-day basis, that only means that the role of state governments and local governments is even more important. That's really to play, I like to say, both offense and defense. State governments and local governments can do more to address climate change, but they also have to act to make sure we're protecting the progress that we have made. So that also means that state governments and local governments have even more opportunity to act to reduce emissions and to help that with our transition to the clean energy economy and to really increase resiliency. So I think goals that all of us have, those of us with the Model Climate Laws Initiative, and I think all of you with Third Act, one of the ways that we can achieve these goals is through focusing our action on state and local governments and state and local government policy for climate change. And so our goal really with this project called the Model Climate Laws Initiative is really about helping advance that type of state and local level climate policy across the country. And we want to do that by really making it as easy as possible for governments to pass and implement effective laws. So we're really focused on legislative efforts that might be responding to what we're seeing at the federal level, filling legal gaps and policy gaps that are being created by backsliding by the Trump administration. We're focused on efforts that really make state authority to act more durable because we are being faced with more and more litigation, not just from those fossil fuel interests, but also from the federal government itself. I guess that's probably because of what David was alluding to, that maybe they are one and the same in many ways. But we're also focused on things that address affordability and have economic benefits and create jobs, because we know that those are the most politically salient right now. I think the fortunate thing is that many climate policies also have those co-benefits, as we all know. And we want to be also focused on laws that can really help with the momentum in other jurisdictions. So we don't want to just adopt a law in New York where I'm located or in Texas or in California. We want to make sure it's kind of creating a theory of change for other states as well. So how do we do all that? Our project really does that by actually drafting model pieces of legislation really that serve as templates and they're intended to address climate change in all kinds of different ways. And we make those publicly available to advocates, folks like you, to policymakers, to lawmakers at every level of government. Although we're definitely focused on state and local right now, and not so much federal. We also provide legal support, legal analysis, implementation support. So a variety of tools that can help legislators and their staff to actually move forward and get good laws passed. The model laws that we produce, they go through a peer review process, so they are ensured of having really high quality. And then we make all these things available for free on a database of model laws and other legal resources. And that's at that link there, lpdd.org, which stands for Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization. So the reason why we have that LPDD acronym there is, and this goes back to the history of our project. So I just want to spend a minute on that. A book that was published about 6 years ago now by Professors Michael Gerard and John Dernbach was called Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization in the United States. It's a very thick legal book that's worth a read if you haven't looked at that in the past. And it really has over 1,500 or so legal and policy recommendations for climate change, really on the mitigation side of climate change, and all kinds of different recommendations for different levels of government and all economic sectors. So economy-wide type of policies, but also things for the industrial sectors and the building sector and the waste sector and things like that. After that book was published, there was this project created called the LPDD project, Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization, that really was about engaging with lawyers from across the country on a pro bono basis to really take those recommendations or policies and translate them into legislative text, into model laws to actually implement those recommendations. So that's resulted in over 80 model laws and over 2,500 legal resources that are available on that website, and that's growing. So that's the history of the project, but a few months ago, over the summer, we really announced the next phase of this project that was really about a partnership between the Sabin Center, which is at Columbia Law School, and a group here in upstate New York, Albany, New York, called Environmental Advocates New York. And so that was when we rebranded as the Model Climate Laws Initiative. That's partly because we are focused not just on decarbonization, not just on mitigation for climate change, but also on resilience, because of the fact that we are unfortunately facing climate change right now and will continue to, sort of regardless of what we do with emission reductions. And so we partnered with the Sabin Center at Columbia and environmental advocates because we're really trying to bring the best of both worlds, meaning academic and legal expertise from the Sabin Center, but also political campaign and advocacy from environmental advocates. We want to kind of bring those two types of forces together to try to move things forward at the state and local level. So when it comes to getting state laws passed, it's often a difficult process. And I'm not here to tell you how a bill becomes a law, because you know all that. But I do want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we see in the state legislative process, even when we do have politicians, lawmakers, state legislators that are really committed to enacting climate change related policy. They often have challenges doing that. They might be part-time legislators. They might have limited staff. They generally have limited capacity. They don't necessarily have the kind of specialized expertise that we need in really complex areas of technology and policy, but also really nuanced legal landscapes that have to understand different levels of federal, state, and local law. So that makes it really difficult to turn some of those really good policy ideas into bill text. Then, as we all know, even if we get a piece of legislation introduced, it goes through a very challenging process, especially when it comes to climate change, because we know our opponents are often, or maybe always, better resourced with financial support and lobbying support and legal support. And oftentimes it's a very short period of time when these bills are negotiated in a legislative session. And then even once a law gets passed, as all of us lawyers know, and certainly as I know as a former state regulator for a big portion of my career, Even once a law gets passed and signed by a governor, that's really only maybe half the battle at most. Passage does not equal implementation. The law then has to go through a rulemaking process. It's often subject to litigation, either the statute or the regulation. The executive branch of the governor or the mayor or whoever has to remain committed to actually implementing that law. So these are all sort of challenges that we have, even if we have committed politicians that want to take a policy and turn it into a climate law. What we do through this initiative is try to help address each of these challenges. We do that in a variety of ways. We really try to identify existing examples that are already out there in a state or a municipality may have already adopted a policy. So we want to bring attention to those examples. We can take a model that we may have developed and tailor it to an individual jurisdiction. We know the law and the policy needs are different in New York versus Texas, so it might not work exactly the same way. We also have access to experts that can help us to identify the most high impact opportunities and really the best legal practices. And I think this last point here on the left-hand column is the most important in my mind because we're considering legal issues in the drafting process so that the laws that we do get passed can be the most able to withstand legal challenge, again, because we know those challenges are coming. Litigation is coming, whether we like it or not. And then later on in the process, we can help too. We can help to assess legal issues that might get raised by opponents. We can offer changes to bill text to really respond to some of those concerns. And we can help to make sure that the agencies, the executive branch agencies that are ultimately going to be charged with implementing that law are sort of best set up for success at that stage of the process. And so our goal is by kind of front loading all of those legal and administrative considerations into the bill drafting process and making it as easy as possible for lawmakers to take text and put it into bills and then get them passed, that we can actually increase and maximize the chances of successful implementation. So just quickly about our process. We really do have a really robust process for developing these model laws. We start with working with a network of experts that are able to identify those highest impact opportunities in different policy areas, and also partner with a variety of organizations in different states across the country because we're a small group. We don't necessarily know the political realities in each individual jurisdiction, but we partner with organizations that do. And so they can help us to identify where we might actually have a chance of moving a piece of legislation along. And then we mostly rely on volunteers, people like you that help us to draft laws and put, again, those policies into legislative text. And do that with, again, those administrative and legal considerations at the top of our minds. And then we have a peer review process. And so everything before it gets put on our website, it gets vetted by this group of experts, which includes people like retired judges and lawyers, but also technical experts and as well as legal experts. And so that helps us to make sure that we've kind of done it right. And so this has already resulted in, like I said, over 80 model laws and 2,500 or so resources, things like actual examples of proposed or enacted laws in different jurisdictions. And really it covers all different sectors of the economy. Again, economy-wide type of policies, but also things that are focused on individual sectors. And you can go, as Karla will show you a little bit, you can go into our database and see all of those things by that pathway or by that economic sector to see examples of particular kinds of policies. We're growing that constantly. We have things like model laws in the works right now around things focused on bidirectional charging for electric vehicles, incentives for cleaner heavy duty vehicles, residential solar tax credits, summaries of regulations to help other states to adopt them. And I think critically, we're working on creating a menu of options so that states have options for responding to what is happening at the federal level. Again, to kind of do more, play offense, but also to ensure that they have their own authority protected, play defense as well. And then quickly, before I turn it over to Karla, really part of our interest here is not just to create great resources and have a lot of content on our website. We don't just want them to sit on the shelf though. So that's why, again, as I mentioned before, part of our work is really working with a network of lawyers, advocacy experts, policy experts to help us make sure that we're kind of getting all of those resources into the hands of actual lawmakers and their staff. And so we're working on growing that on an ongoing basis by working with folks like Third Act and Third Act lawyers and other groups across the country that can really help us with that on the ground. So with that, I want to hand it over to Karla. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Karla can share her screen and show you a little bit about how we actually can use how you all can use our resources on our website.
Hi, thanks, John, and hi everyone out there. So John gave you this great overview. What we've done with the handful of laws that we've drafted, as well as some key state laws, is we've created some top 10 lists. And one of the things I know a lot of you are interested in are renewables and solar. So for example, if you went in and said top 10 for subsidies, you'd have various states that have passed laws on subsidies that you could review with brief summaries as a way to capture, options. And again, as John mentioned, some of the states are really taking a lead in comprehensive legislation. Others are being less direct. Let me see if I can get another one up here. Let me go back. I'm going to share another link. Nope, it's not coming up. Sorry, I'm not getting the click back to the LPDD site that I was hoping for. But in any case, here's our site, and let me just wait 1 second. I have this link.
Looks like you have it a tab right next to it. I can see it.
I thought I did top 10 electricity. No, it's not working. So sorry about that, everyone. Share, go back to my sharing. When you go on our site, lpdd.org, you come to a section which lets you search by topic, by state, and by subject matter. And as I mentioned, we have a top 10 list for things like buildings, building efficiency, energy efficiency, solar subsidies. We actually got put into the one of the federal laws, the need for bidirectional charging for EV chargers. And that was language generated by us. And what we do in this process is not only cull through what every state is doing throughout their legislative session, but we try to summarize and bring them forward. Part of our outreach effort is to really crystallize for users what are the most recent state laws, and again, as John mentioned, ones that have successfully stood the test of being put into regulation and not had a lot of litigation. We found in talking to members from the National Council of Environmental Legislators and others, one of their real concerns is how do they sell it to a Republican administration in their state? How do they create something that's bipartisan? And so as you go through the list and some of the things that we're doing, the way the laws that are drafted by LPDD are written is to explain some of those nuances. And one of the things we're particularly focused on is underserved communities. And so a lot of our legislation also will have language saying you might want to consider X, depending on the economic situation of your community. And so I just encourage you to get on the website at this point and look at not only our top 10 lists, but some of the key topic areas. And I'll turn it back to you. Jim?
All right, John, could you bring up my first slide, California Climate Action Plan? I'm going to focus on how MCLI and its database can help to formulate ordinances for decarbonization measures at the city and county levels. Use a case study about San Anselmo, California, a pretty progressive city in the Bay Area, and what it has done on a bunch of decarb issues in the last few years. This information was provided by Alexis Feynman, former mayor and city council member from I think 2020 to 2024. She's now a first-year law student at Berkeley. The MCLI database has over 500 resources, mainly ordinances, some other items from cities and counties. Also, you can use statutes. Often you can use statutes, parts of model laws and statutes for issues at your city or county level. So it's probably more like 1,000, but it's explicitly from cities and counties, it's 500. San Anselmo's decarb efforts began in 2019 when they decided to implement what we here in California call a climate action plan. And there's a little slide about it. It's out of a regulation, not required, but if cities, a lot of cities, progressive cities, and we have quite a few, want to do it, so they follow the reg. If a cap is adopted, there's some streamlining for subsequent, housing and transportation projects under the California Environmental Quality Act. Makes it a little easier to get them entitled. An adequate cap must have establish an overall emissions level for the jurisdiction and then specify measures that taken together would hit the level. Typical measures you see around California are EV chargers, more EV chargers, accelerate public sector EV purchases, and increase electrification and building efficiency. So let's go to San Anselmo in the next slide. After approving the plan, we're going to do a plan. Here's the elements. In 2019, the beginning of this slide, the city went on, then they had to adopt pieces of it. You'll see in there, this is a little busy, but there were a lot of things they were doing: bike and transportation plans, eliminating electric yard equipment, green reach codes, promoting EV chargers, and building electrification measures. Alexis and others on the council and city and county staff, city and county planning staff, we found out here planning staff and of course city attorneys can certainly use our resources. They used the MCLI database for a number of these items that they had to implement from 2020 on. And let's look at one of them, building electrification. Next slide, please. So the city was thinking of mandating all electric buildings, new buildings anyway, I think. But there was a Ninth Circuit case that came down when Berkeley was trying to mandate, I believe it was inductive electric stoves, and avoided that ordinance. So San Anselmo shifted to carrots and sticks. They went into the database. They found materials on 3 carrots. There you see them on the slides, density bonuses from Idaho and South Carolina, a little surprisingly, and Vermont. Floor area ratio boost increases. That was from Minneapolis. Property tax exemptions from Connecticut. And then sticks, time of sale energy assessments and disclosures from Berkeley, ongoing benchmarking and audits from LA, greenhouse emissions reporting from Boston. And I've looked at the Boston stuff. Boston has some big ordinances. So that might be one place, especially for you in New England, to look. Let's see. Next slide, please. So overall, Alexis and her colleagues at the city found the database helpful for several reasons, as shown on this slide. I think I'll just elaborate a little bit on 3 of them. The database educates and inspires. There's resources on a broad range of issues from all across the country, including, importantly, the states that are pretty aggressive on this. New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, big statute in Illinois this year. Colorado's done a bunch of stuff, California and Washington. And their models and the existing ordinances from many jurisdictions provide a starting point for drafting a particular issue you want to address, the particular measure you want to implement in your city or county. It's kind of like a good form book on decarbonization laws. It also uses staff time, makes staff work more efficient in finding useful ordinances. They're all in one place. I mean, I can find decarb ordinances in California by going to LA website, to San Diego County has a good plan. I can go to 10 different websites, but we put them all together in one. And the model laws, they're professionally done and vetted, and they're summarized. So you've got summarized in the model laws. Also, Karla didn't mention it, but each item, each of the 2,500 plus items, when you get to them in the database, say you get to a bidirectional ordinance, there's a little 1 to 5 paragraph summary, usually no more than a page, that you can read before you get the ordinance, especially useful for very long resources. So it's like a good treatise, a good treatise on decarb laws. And finally, there is some reduction on the politics of things. It helps with reducing political discomfort and perception of legal risk. You can say, oh, Colorado did this, Washington did this, Massachusetts did this, depending on where you are. And also it's assembled by Columbia Law School, which is, of course, one of the top schools in the country. So if you and your fellow Third Act members want to do something in cities or counties, we can help. I'll turn it back over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Jim. That's great. Really appreciate it. So just last slide here. I just want to quickly go over some ways that if you do want to get involved, you could. Based on your area of expertise or your state or locality that you're interested in working in, you could be suggesting specific policies to us that you think would really have a chance of moving forward, and that maybe we could help you with translating that policy into legislative text. Or since many of you are probably experienced environmental lawyers, you could actually help and volunteer to draft a model law, or to take a model and tailor it to really the sort of unique circumstance in your state or in your municipality. You might also know about laws that we just haven't found or haven't caught yet into our database, and you can just let us know about those, things that we can add to our database, because we want to keep growing that. And I think this last point here, based on your experience and your careers, since so many of you have such great experience, I think you can help us with really connecting to different networks, especially in individual states. I'm based in New York, so I know some folks in New York and sort of how New York state government operates or doesn't operate, as the case may be. But in other states, I might have less of a connection. So you could help us with finding folks to collaborate with. So this, I guess I said that was the last slide, but this is the actual last slide. And so that has our contact information, including emails. And then if you were to go onto that QR code, you would get to you could fill out a form to stay engaged. So we have your contact information, and you can tell us how you might want to get involved, how you might want to hook us up to different networks, or volunteer to do things like drafting or peer review of our model laws. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and thank you very much. And we'll see if there's questions. I think I see there's some stuff in the chat. I couldn't see that during the conversation, so during the presentation rather. So
I think the chat items are more sort of ideas rather than questions per se. But I actually have a couple of questions. And first of all, thank you so much for this presentation. It's really fascinating. What I'm wondering about is how that partnership with EA&Y works with the advocates, because I'm sort of wondering whether, do they bring ideas to you? Do you make suggestions to them? Where does the initiative start?
Yeah, it's both. It's definitely a two-way street, right? So in New York, EA has a good sense of the politics in Albany, and knows sort of where the pressure points are for things like lobbying and activism of policy. So they can bring ideas to me of things that they think might have a chance of success in the next legislative session in Albany. And we can see if there's a law that already exists or if some kind of legislative text needs to be crafted, and vice versa. I might be able to identify a policy or a law that I think would be a great thing to advance, and they can help with creating that kind of campaign and doing the actual on the ground lobbying. And so, ideally, this hasn't happened yet, but ideally, this organization would have that type of partner in each of the 50 states, or as many of the 50 states as possible, so that we can have that kind of two-way exchange of ideas and advocacy, as much as possible across the country. So good question. Thanks, Pat.
And do people bring bills that have already been introduced to you and say, hey, does this look good? Do we need to suggest some amendments? Does that happen?
Yeah, that definitely happens, mostly for New York ones right now, but I'm open to that happening in other states as well. So yes, absolutely, that kind of thing happens, and I certainly will have thoughts, either based on legal risk, or based on, like I said, uh, whether or not an agency is set up to be able to actually implement that law. So
Yeah. And one other thing, and this actually reveals my naivete a little bit here, but I think Karla mentioned the National Council of Environmental Legislators. I had not heard of that. It sounds like people that you should be working very closely with. Do you have good connections with that?
yeah, we do. The National Caucus of Environmental Legislators is a really good group that we are working to actually formalize our relationship, but we are already talking with them on a pretty regular basis. And they have a good network of, as the name suggests, legislators that are very interested in advancing environmental policy. And so not just climate change, but other environmental policies as well. So yes, we're definitely working with them, and
Yeah.
fruitful partnership
Say,
for
just
sure. Go
not
ahead.
to interrupt, the National Council on Environmental Legislators, the legislators self-select to be in that
Right.
group,
Right.
right? So if you're in a state and you can look up who's on their list from your state, reach out to them directly. We also have a relationship with Lawyers for Good Government, a
Hmm.
relationship with some of the former EPA staffers, and there's a group called Elected Officials to Protect America, EOPA.org. Again, they're very much supportive of climate change activities. And going back to what John originally started with, LPDD was really devoted to mitigation, not adaptation and not other things. We really wanted to prevent it, which goes in line with the first speaker, David Hughes, who said, what do we need to do to stop this? And so a lot of the work in the book goes to mitigating climate actions. We do understand that adaptation is part of it, and we're bringing that into our fold, but we're still focused as much as we can be on mitigation. And then on the permitting that was in the chat, one of the issues is some of the states are passing laws to prohibit communities that are against solar and wind developments in their area, because that's also a mixed bag. Some of the states are not very, communities are not very enthusiastic. And so that's something you have to weigh. And so part of our research goes into really understanding, the range of dissent and how we can bring people together. There's studies by the Department of Energy on which states prohibit solar and wind. They do siting and permitting. And the Sabin Center that John's a part of has a lot of resources and studies as well.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Any other questions from the rest of the folks here? Well, I just want to say this is being recorded, as you know. So if you missed the QR code or the links or anything like that, you'll get those soon enough. I'm also going to drop into the chat, and by the way, save the chat. But I'm going to drop a few shameless plugs for Third Act Lawyers. You might want to click on some of those links, or at least save the chat so that you've got that information. And I want to thank again our presenters tonight, David Hughes from Third Act Actions Lab, John Binder, Karla Perri, and Jim Geocaris from the MCLI program. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining us. and the recording will be available probably within the next couple of days.
Thanks very
Have a good
much.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Great work.